Good morning. I'm Sidney Porter from the Health Physics Society History Committee, and it's Tuesday, June the 18th, and we're at the annual meeting of the Health Physics Society in Tampa, Florida. And it's my distinct pleasure to videotape and to introduce an old friend, Rod Ice, who is a radiopharmacist and a teacher extraordinaire, has taught a number of facilities, and a man of many, many talents. And I'd like to start by asking Rod to tell us about his origins, where he grew up, and why he chose the University of Washington for his college, his beginning college work. So Ron, welcome.
Good morning, Sid. It's good to be here. I go back quite a ways to World War II as my origins. I was born at Fort Lewis, Washington, which is a military camp. My father was in the service, and being in the service, we followed the war very closely. And of course, as a young boy, when Hiroshima and Nagasaki took place, I was utterly amazed, never heard of such a thing, couldn't figure out what was going on, and became interested in radiation because of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki aspects. Well, I grew up in western Washington. We moved around in western Washington, around the Mount St. Helens area. And I graduated from high school at Olympia High School in 1955. I then entered the College of Pharmacy at the University of Washington. The impact there was a small town pharmacist who was a good fisherman, and I enjoyed fishing, and he used to take me fishing, and so I ended up as a pharmacist. And in pharmacy school, I became acquainted with radioactivity again. This time as the professor was working with a mercury 198 ammoniated mercury ointment and wanted to know the penetration through skin. And so I helped him label the mercury ointment and penetrate through the skin. But that was my sole contact with radiation at that time. But I graduated from the University of Washington in 1959 and opened up my own pharmacy in southwestern Washington. I was a retail pharmacist for 5 years, owning my own store. That got boring very quick because I enjoy new challenges, and I happened to pick up a professional article about how pharmacists had a role in radiological health, written by John Christian at Purdue University. And so I wrote Dr. Christian and asked him about radiological health programs, and he invited me to take a look at it. So the 1964 World's Fair in New York, we drove to New York in a new car and stopped back by Purdue on the way back, and he talked me into enrolling as a graduate student in radiological health.
At Purdue?
At Purdue. I had looked at several other schools, but the closest school that had both radiological health and pharmacy was Purdue. All the Western schools that had radiological health did not have a pharmacy school. So I did my graduate work at Purdue. I didn't sell my drugstore at the time. I thought, well, if I failed and flunked out, I'd still go back and be a pharmacist. But I finished my master's degree, and Dr. Christian encouraged me to go on for my doctorate. And so I went home and over a cup of coffee sold the drugstore to the fellow who was managing it for me. And went back
nice way to do business.
Went back to graduate school and let the pharmacy pay my way through graduate school. Also had a radiological health fellowship at that particular point in time. So I did my...
Was that an old AEC fellowship?
No, it was Bureau of Rad Health.
Oh, Bureau of Rad Health Fellowship.
Fellowship. Okay. And when I emphasized health physics there and medicinal chemistry, there wasn't any such thing as a nuclear pharmacy program at that time. It just happened to be that I was a pharmacist who had an interest in health physics. And then when I graduated from there in Purdue in '67, I put my resume out for a number of colleges, and Dr. Murray Tuckerman from Temple University called me and said...
In Philadelphia?
Philadelphia. and indicated that he had a position open there. The NRC was looking down at Temple University, and they had a number of specific licenses, and they told him that they had to combine all their licenses and get an RSO and organize. And so I walked into...
and what year was that?
1967.
Okay.
So I went to Purdue, I went to Temple University.
And probably they have a well-known medical school, among other things, so I imagine they had a lot of licenses.
They had pretty close to 40 licenses at the time.
Wow, and so you combine them all into one master license.
That is correct.
It's a lot of work.
And one rad safety program covering the entire area.
Including the medical school, as well as the university.
School. But it was interesting, they have a 12 MeV linear accelerator there for beta therapy. And the first week I was on the job, they asked me to calibrate it for them. So that was the way I started out in getting involved with medical physics.
And that's not an easy calibration either.
It's not an easy calibration, and it's enough to give you activation in the room.
Yeah. Oh, it was high energy too, huh?
Yeah, right. So they had a rad health program at Temple University, which I started teaching the course in health physics, and I taught a course in nuclear pharmacy, and had a number of graduate students during the 4 years that I was there. The program was involved with the School of Dentistry, and Dr. Updegrave, who was chairman of the radiology department of the School of Dentistry, and I developed the long red line cones that are used in dental work.
Oh, and I didn't know you were the developer of those.
Well,
wow.
Actually, he was a developer, and I did the dosimetry on the cones.
Because they went a long way to reducing dental exposure around the world.
That's right. And then at Temple University, I did get involved with the nuclear medicine unit in teaching in the nuclear pharmacy as an elective course. Then I got an invitation to go to the University of Michigan in 1971. They wanted to open up a nuclear pharmacy. They had the Phoenix reactor on campus. And so I went up there in 71 and started a nuclear pharmacy program. And opened up one of the first nuclear pharmacies in the country.
And you were there how long at Michigan?
There 5 years, and we had laboratories at the Phoenix reactor, and we made fluorine-18, which we distributed to the Detroit area. And then we also made technetium, some of the first technetium compound with methyl ethyl ketone extraction generator type, before they had the aluminum oxide generator that we use today. We had a separate pharmacy license. We, at that point in time, had Gerald Ford was president, so we were very fortunate with our proposals for research, and we had about 4 postdocs working for us, and we turned out some 60 compounds of radiopharmaceuticals that for potential use, of which 6-iodomethylnorcholesterol became a commercial product.
That was really pioneering effort then, wasn't it? Then
it really was, because it was we were distributing radiopharmaceuticals first around the Detroit area, and then because of the selective compounds that we were making at Michigan, they were distributed worldwide. We actually had INDs on the products. So I was there until 76.
Now you had a number of graduate students.
Oh yeah, I've had graduate students all along the way. I've probably had about 50 particular graduate students do projects for me, and maybe over 125 theses that I've sat on and participated in.
Wow, so you've been on 125 thesis committees. That's awe-inspiring. That's so many.
So
I know that you had a biochemist back at Temple University. You know, I remember Steve Gertz, for instance, as one of your grad students.
We're very fortunate from a standpoint that radiation is used as a tool in many areas. It's used in biochemistry, biology, dentistry, medicine. We're the specialists in the use of the isotope and the detection of the isotope. So most of the work has been collaborative work with people in other areas of one nature or another. And so with the discovery of these new compounds at Michigan, we really had the work of the organic chemists, we had the work of the physicians in internal medicine for clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
We officially opened up a nuclear pharmacy, got a nuclear pharmacy license at the University of Michigan, and was one of the first nuclear pharmacies in the country. And during that time, there was a big emphasis by the FDA to standardize radiopharmaceuticals. While among the pharmacists, we really felt that we were capable of individualizing doses. So a number of us had some interactions with the FDA. And it was during that time that we started to organize the nuclear pharmacists into a group of specialty recognition. And we affiliated with the American Pharmaceutical Association, the section on nuclear pharmacy, and I was one of the 6 founders of that particular section. And from that section we went on to write board certification for nuclear pharmacists. And
so you helped write the board certification criteria for the nuclear pharmacists?
Yes. And today there's about 500 nuclear pharmacists in the U.S. Who are members of that section in the American Pharmaceutical Association. So from my emphasis on pharmacy and health physics, I lectured to nuclear medicine residents and interns and in the academic program on nuclear pharmacy, radiopharmaceuticals, radiation safety at Michigan. And then in about '76, I accepted the position as Dean of the University of Oklahoma College of Pharmacy. And for 8 years, I was Dean of the College of Pharmacy.
So did you have graduate student teaching responsibilities also, or were you just administrative?
No, I had my hands in everything.
As usual, I might add.
The University of Oklahoma College of Pharmacy at the time I took over was on probation, academic probation. And because of that, due to the fact that they didn't have facilities. So I became a salesman on the road developing and raising money for a College of Pharmacy, and raised a little over $7 million to build the College of Pharmacy at the University of Oklahoma. And in that College of Pharmacy, we again opened up the first nuclear pharmacy in the state of Oklahoma, in Oklahoma City. And then we opened up a clinical program up in Tulsa, so we opened up a nuclear pharmacy up in Tulsa. So I've actually opened up 3 nuclear pharmacies in my career.
And you had a lot of students at the same time while you were doing all that.
I had graduate students all along. I've had the pleasure of publishing over 100 articles and making about 160 scientific presentations at conferences and that type of thing.
Wow, yeah, that's an incredible accomplishment. And tell me, in the health physics area, what were some of your biggest challenges as far as the health physics end of things?
Board certification is probably one of the biggest challenges, getting ready for that, and coming out of school with a pharmacy degree and trying out for board certification. But I became board certified health physicist, and I enjoyed dosimetry, internal dosimetry, especially the radiopharmaceuticals, when I can do the kinetics. And I guess when you had to describe my research area, it would be the development, dosimetry, and design of radiopharmaceuticals. And so I would classify my expertise as in internal dosimetry from a health physics standpoint.
I know you've published widely on that.
We published extensively, especially on these compounds that we discovered. We had all the biological data, and therefore could do the internal dosimetry from a very applied standpoint. Another area that I did get involved with was centralized nuclear pharmacies. The question came up with how does a pharmacist who works all day long milking a generator and dispensing doses, who actually picks up more radiation dose per se, how do you justify that in terms of all the technicians receiving the dose from generators distributed widely in the hospital? So we did a population study while I was at Oklahoma, doing the person REM dose of all the technicians and doing individualized doses in hospitals versus the sum dose of the nuclear pharmacist in the pharmacy, and found out that the overall person REM dose was far less in a nuclear pharmacy operation than having all the individual doses spread out throughout the technicians in the hospitals. So those are a couple of the health physics areas that we've been involved with. I've been extensively involved with the administration of licensed programs, from the one at Temple University, which you mentioned. I was chairman of the Radiation Safety Committee at the University of Oklahoma. Let me proceed on there. After I left the University of Oklahoma and went on to...
And you were there, what, 8 years, did you say?
8 years. To Eagle Pitcher Industries, where I was Vice President of Research and Development.
And what were the major things you were working on there?
There was borated compounds. Boron is used extensively as a neutron absorber, and we were interested in lining pools for storage of fuel elements, design of casks, coming up with borated compounds. And so we synthesized a number of borated compounds. And we actually had about 50 people in the research laboratory. We had a special group of fellows who were involved with semiconductors and crystal growth. And in fact, that's where our paths crossed again in terms of making a special crystal for you.
Yeah, I was a consultant at that point to the Philadelphia College of Physicians, and the Mutter Museum has an incredibly important piece of radiation detection equipment. It's called a piezoelectroscope, and it's one that was hand-built by Pierre Curie, and that Pierre and Marie Curie used to discover the elements polonium and the element radium. And that actual instrument was what they made the measurements with. Without that instrument, they had no way to see the difference between uranium, the activity of uranium and polonium and radium. And so that was a very important instrument that was hand-built by Pierre Curie, and that Marie used to get her PhD thesis, and they used to get the work that they were awarded the 2 Nobel Prizes for.
Right.
And so this piece of the crystal had broken and disappeared, the original crystal. And Marie Curie, when she came over here for President Hardy to give her the gram of radium that the women of the United States gave her after World War I, she stopped at the College of Philadelphia, College of Physicians in Philadelphia, to thank them, because they're the ones that innovated Curie therapy, which is the first radiation therapy in this country. And she gave them this instrument in thanks for that innovation in the United States. And so it's historically a very important piece of detection equipment. And we did not have it. We had a picture of the piezo crystal, but we didn't have one. And so I called Rod, who I knew was at Eagle Pitcher, and that they were very heavy into piezoelectric crystals. And you very nicely, as I remember, actually made up one to her dimensions.
That's correct.
And it was just a very nice thing that you did for the history of science, was to make up that crystal, actually a working crystal that is in there. And so any people that might want to do historically see that, you can go to the College of Physicians on 22nd Street near Market in Philadelphia, and you can see the piezoelectroscope and the crystal that Eagle Pitzer through Rod made up for them.
Well, it was a privilege to work with you on that, Sid. We had a complete crystal growth laboratories and had the cutting ability, and we were using piezoelectric crystals for a number of military purposes.
Weren't they used on the the anti-Scud missiles as I remember. They were used as detectors on the Patriot.
They're a shoulder-held missile. Trying to think of the name of it at the moment.
Seems to me they were weren't they the detectors in the Patriots that shot down the Scuds during the Gulf War?
No, they were actually designed for aircraft. It was a secondary it was a UV detector, and it set up a UV field. And if a plane through it, you lost the UV field. And so it was the lack of a signal that was sent back to the missile, and the missile would fire, and they could put out all the decoy they wanted, and you were still locked onto it.
I know it's a very, as far as military application is concerned, they're extremely important detectors. And maybe I'm getting into classified areas here. I don't mean to do that. Well,
it's still an active part of our military, and they're still being made. I'll put it that way.
And it's amazing that Pierre Curie is the one that discovered the phenomena of piezoelectricity and made these early detectors, and we're still using these detectors for applications in the 21st century.
That is correct.
Which amazes me that phenomena is still so important after all these years, because it's over 100 years old now, the technology.
That's correct.
But anyway, while you were at Eagle Pitzer, you were in charge of R&D there?
Yes.
And I take it you were working on many, many projects.
We had 3 great big areas. One was the crystal area, which had a number of projects within the area. We had the chemistry area, which was doing synthesis of borated compounds. And then we were getting into the EPA analytical radiochemistry as our 3rd area of expertise. So it was quite a large operation of about 50 employees, all dedicated to research.
So you were a very busy person, and you've always been very good in applications. And boy, these are really applications, aren't they?
I'm an applied scientist, all the way.
Aren't most health physicists, wouldn't you classify them as applied scientists of one kind or another?
For the most part.
Or technicians?
Well, I wouldn't call them technicians. It's quite a professional area. It's a real challenge. I think there's a separate role for technicians to do the routine.
I meant technicians in the highest state-of-the-art form, but in any case, there were one of the interesting things about you is that you've had so many different areas that you've worked in that you were able to go and to run a big applied research laboratory and be comfortable doing it.
Well, I've run radiation safety programs. I've run colleges. I've run a research laboratory. And not to mention the fact that when I was at the University of Washington, that was back in a time when you either got drafted or you joined the reserve or joined the ROTC. And my choice was the National Guard because they paid. ROTC didn't pay.
And what year did you join the National Guard?
1954.
And you started as a private when you
Private E1.
Private E1. And for some 28 years, I think you told me you were in the National Guard?
27 years.
27 years. And you made it to what rank?
06, bird colonel.
A bird colonel. Wow, there are not many people that make it all that far.
I started out at E1 in an artillery unit, and they saw that I knew a little bit about mathematics, so they made me their weatherman. And I went out and sent up weather balloons early in the morning and calculated the air direction and velocity so that the artillery could fire their weapons. And that was as an enlisted man. Then I went through infantry OCS and became an officer. And when they found out that I had a nuclear background, they made me a nuclear science officer. And so for 8 years I taught nuclear science to physicians and soldiers at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, and taught X-ray survey work. Yeah. And then that was all as up to a lieutenant colonel. When I became a lieutenant colonel, I promoted myself out of a position, typically as you do in the Army, and they put me in the Pentagon, where I became a nuclear science officer in the Army Safety Office. We were direct advisors to the Chief of Staff Army on nuclear matters. So I finished my career in the Army by advising the Chief of Staff Army in the Army Safety Office on nuclear science affairs.
That must have been a fascinating assignment. And have you retired out of the National Guard now?
I've retired out of the military. I retired from Eagle Pitcher, and I'm hoping to retire from my current job within the next year.
Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about your current job? In other words, you were at Eagle Pitcher, which is located where, by the way?
Miami, Oklahoma. It's right up in the northeast corner by Joplin, Missouri.
And from Oklahoma, you decided to come east.
Come east, and Atlanta is where I'm at now at Georgia Tech. I'm the radiation safety officer and an adjunct professor there. Again, taking on graduate students, which I enjoy from a standpoint of research. And like we've got 2 posters at this particular Health Physics Society meeting, and we usually have a poster or a presentation at every meeting.
Oh, every meeting. Many of your students, I know that. I remember that there was a particular problem that you've had at Georgia Tech that's a rather unique one. Usually what you're doing is that you're using the reactors at the universities or the facilities for you know, various graduate students to get their PhDs with. And you had a unique problem here with the Olympics. Not many people can blame the Olympics for anything. But you're one of the few people that has a real problem with the Olympics, aren't you?
Well, let me lead into that a little bit. I left Eagle Pitcher because, and joined Georgia Tech because they had a nuclear reactor. And I needed a nuclear reactor to do the research that I was interested in. I was interested in boron neutron capture therapy, or the use of boron-aided chemical compounds, which we were synthesizing at Eagle Pitcher, or which new radiopharmaceuticals for tumor localization and alpha therapy.
Right, so it's really cutting edge, a cutting edge field, no doubt about it.
And Georgia Tech had one of the few nuclear reactors that had the spectrum available that I wanted for my research. Well, I was there about 4 years, and then the Olympics came. Georgia Tech was the Olympic Village in 1996, and so there's all kinds of security, as you can well imagine, that goes around with it. And our reactor at that time had HEU, which stands for highly enriched uranium fuel. That's weapons grade fuel. And there's been a program for a number of years to remove the weapons grade fuel from these early nuclear reactors and replace them with low enriched uranium fuel. So we agreed to shut down the reactor and remove the HEU fuel, and we designed and did all the calculations and for putting in LEU fuel, and actually had the fuel,
low enrichment fuel.
Low enrichment fuel, and actually the fuel was made for us. And
who made it, by the way?
B&W.
B&W, okay.
We shipped off the fuel, defueled the reactor and shipped off the fuel to Savannah, thinking that when the Olympics was over with, we would bring in LEU fuel. Well, when the Olympics was over with, the president of the university decided that we would not reopen the reactor.
And what was his rationale for that?
The rationale was several reasons. Number one, the reactor had been run for 30 years, and the license was up. It had a 30-year engineering lifetime, and we were going to have to upgrade the reactor. Number two, the reactor had some maintenance problems which needed to be done, again requiring some more money. Number three, the enrollment for the nuclear engineering program is down over the last few years. Number four, there is need for more students and more projects on the reactor, but the paperwork associated with doing reactor experiments was such that there were fewer and fewer faculty using the reactor. So basically we tried to save the reactor and had a campaign to write the president of the university and say what we need is the reactor at Georgia Tech. But I remember specifically the conversation with the president, and he said, "Rod," he said, "got a lot of nice letters, but there wasn't a check in them." And that was the end of the reactor.
So it was a dollar thing rather than a safety issue.
It was not a safety issue, but I would add to it that it was a dollar issue, but it was also a public relations issue.
You think it was more of a PR than anything? What do you
I
think
it was
the leading item was?
The money, the upkeep.
Yeah, it is an expensive tool. There's no doubt about that.
It's a very expensive tool. When you consider the manpower and security needs, for instance, during the Olympics, even though we didn't have any fuel, we had a complete National Guard company of MPs activated for 2 months of service around our reactor, which had no fuel.
If it had no fuel in it, why did you need the MPs?
Public relations from the standpoint that
because they weren't guarding anything if there's no fuel.
That's right.
So you just had these guys there because the public thought that there was something there, which there really wasn't.
Well, that's true today too, because for instance, we have totally decommissioned the nuclear reactor. The reactor now consists of 818 tons of radioactive waste in 3 different states, and we still have our reactor license. And so we have all the security that's required as if we had a real live reactor on campus.
And the reason you have a license is that you have, I guess, long half-life activation products that are structural material that are there in the concrete.
Well, actually we had, but they've all been removed.
Well, why do you still have a license then?
Well, we're waiting for the final survey.
Oh, I see. So it's just administrative. There's nothing there now.
There's nothing there now, but we play like there's a real reactor there. We do all the security, do all the air sampling.
Incredible expense for no reason at all. And so you're just waiting. But
our license conditions specify that we will do that.
And so you're babysitting something that used to be but doesn't exist any longer.
That is absolutely correct.
And that's got to be costing the university a lot, as a matter of fact.
Well, it's interesting. The reactor, when it was built in 1965, cost the university $4 million. We're over $7 million in decommissioning costs at this point in time.
Which is not unusual, that ratio, by the way. You'll find that for a large power reactor, that ratio is 10 to 20 to 1 rather than just, well, yours is what?
2 to 1.
2 to 1. And the larger the reactor, the bigger the problem comes in decommissioning. And so this is one of the last university reactors, isn't it, that is not zero power?
There's actually a large number of nuclear reactors in universities, but they're mostly all being decommissioned at this point in time.
And most of them are low power, too. There weren't many as powerful as yours.
No, ours was the 3rd most highest ranking power at 5 megawatt. And ours had through tubes, so you could actually do production of research items on it by moving a conveyor belt through the reactor unit.
And so I take it at this point in time, Rod, you're kind of looking forward to finishing the saga of the Georgia Tech reactor completely.
Well, it's interesting, Sid. We started this in '96, projected out a 5-year program, and we're still going. And I had projected retirement by this time, and I'm still going. Yes. So the reactor is basically job security.
Well, I imagine that you've retired from so many different jobs over the years, though, that you're a pro at retiring too.
Well, I'm ready to retire full time.
And you'll be going back to where your grandchildren are, probably.
Go back to. I have children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren now.
Oh, congratulations!
Most of them live in the Midwest, and we'll be moving back there.
Well, we're going to miss you in the East Coast area. I certainly enjoyed some of the team teaching that we did at Georgia Tech. That was a lot of fun.
We've had a a lot of fun together, and not just you and I, but when I stop and think back that my first experiments were in 1958, and it's now 2002. It's a number of years ago. It was about time to wrap it up.
It is. Well, your contributions have been so many, so numerous, and of course all the papers that you've written and the presentations that you've given, and the many students that you've guided through the graduate programs. How about, what's your perspective on the big picture of the science of health physics now? What would you tell youngsters just coming into the field? Now,
well, let me lead into that by saying, Sid, that at last year's Health Physics Society meeting, a young man came up to me and told me that he had heard my name over and over again, and I asked him where he heard it, and he told me that his major professor was one of my first graduate students.
That makes you feel a little bit old, doesn't it, there? Right?
But it made my heart feel warm.
But it's wonderful, yes.
And so I'm pleased to see young people going into the area of health physics. I think it's a uniquely challenging area from the standpoint that it's something new all the time. You don't rest on your laurels. You can't expect the same thing to happen.
Oh, absolutely.
I delivered a paper last year called "Surprise, Surprise, Surprise" with the decommissioning of our reactor. Like, digging up the reactor and finding old pneumatic tubes that weren't in the diagram. Finding out that graphite theoretically does not activate, but there's impurities in graphite that
they activate,
and they create significantly to the dose. So you always got to be prepared, because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yes.
What's going to happen next? There's a real need out there for health physicists from a regulatory standpoint, from a operational standpoint, from a military standpoint, from an industrial standpoint. It's a place where they can have great fulfillment in their life. Salaries are good. I would encourage young people today to consider, if they've got a math background and a curiosity background and they're willing to work a little bit, they'll make excellent health physicists.
Absolutely, yes. Well, Rod, it's been a real pleasure to sit and reminisce with you over the years. It's amazing how health physicists' paths crossed again and again and again over the years. And I've enjoyed going back and talking about your very rich and varied career. And I want to thank you on behalf of the Health Physics Society History Committee for taking time to sit down and to share all these things with us. And it's been a pleasure doing this. I really enjoyed it.
Sid, it's been a pleasure to know you and be a member of the Health Physics Society for a number of years. It's warmed my heart to see the interrelationship between pharmacy and health physics, and to think that this whole health physicist helped start nuclear pharmacy, and how we work synergistically with all the professions.
And it's amazing how as a young pharmacist, you always knew that you were interested in radiation applications, and how that came to develop a whole specialty field. Because I'm sure the word nuclear pharmacy probably hadn't even been coined when you were at the University of Washington yet.
That's true. In fact, I was, just as a PS to our conversation, one of the major arguments and discernments that I had in the nuclear pharmacy group was, is it radiopharmacy or is it nuclear pharmacy? And I was the one who pushed hard to call it the field of nuclear pharmacy with radiopharmaceuticals, and that we don't talk about radiopharmacy, we talk about radiopharmaceuticals. And we're a nuclear pharmacist and not radiopharmacist. And that's the way it's come down in the literature today.
Well, it's you know, for me it's wonderful to be able to have this tape on the founder of the nuclear pharmacy field, and I'm sure that this will be looked at by an awful lot of people in the future when they're looking at the history of our society. And I just want to thank you again for your time but mostly for all your contributions and all the graduate students who you've been able to lead and to infuse with a joy of learning, which I think has always been your trademark. I've always admired you for that.
Well, that's one of the thrills of academia, is to look back and your product is your students.
Absolutely. And so thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
My pleasure. Okay, fellas, I think that's a wrap here.